My name is Alma. I'm 32 years old. And this is the story of how the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally made me feel like an outsider in my own bloodline, until one afternoon changed everything. Began with a phone call. The kind that starts off sounding harmless but ends with something that sticks to your skin like a bad memory. I was sitting at my desk in Portland, sipping cold green tea and answering emails from my team at Stratalign, the biotech firm I had been part of since its founding. We just wrapped up phase 2 trials on a neural regeneration project and I was exhausted but proud. That's when the screen lit up. It was my father. Now you have to understand, my father doesn't call me unless something is wrong. And usually when he does, wrong means they need money or I've forgotten someone's birthday. Alma, he said, his voice as clipped as always. Your mother's birthday is in 3 weeks. Claire and her boyfriend are flying in from Arizona. It's going to be a garden party. Big, classy. Keep it simple, okay? I smiled, a little unsure. You mean keep the food simple or the outfit? There was a pause, then a sigh. I mean, if you insist on coming home for your mother's birthday, don't call me your father anymore. Just like that. That was the line. Blinked. What? She doesn't want to be embarrassed, he went on. Claire's boyfriend is a doctor. Real one. Not code and wires or whatever you do. Your mother says. Well, you know how she gets. And I did know. My mother could slice you open without ever raising her voice. A woman who believed in impressions, pedigree, and polished appearances. A woman who had once whispered to a church friend that my plain brown dress was modest but forgettable. I was 12. That phone call wasn't about whether I was invited. It was a warning. Don't come unless you're beautiful, sparkling, someone we can brag about. Not a tech engineer with dark circles and calloused hands. Not the daughter who stayed quiet and paid the bills behind the scenes. I had just finished wiring another $410 that morning to cover their electric, water, and internet. For the 3rd year running. My name wasn't on the deed to the house. I didn't live there. I wasn't on a single birthday card or family group chat. But I was the invisible backbone keeping the lights on while Claire posted filtered beach selfies, and my parents played host in their lavender-scented backyard. And now, suddenly, I was unfit to attend a party on property I had been paying to power. You want humiliation? Try sitting in your studio apartment alone, heating up lentil soup while your father, whose heart surgery bills you helped manage, tells you not to call him dad anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't even speak. I just hung up. Then I sat in silence and stared at the steam rising off the bowl in front of me. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because of anger. Not because I was thinking of what to say. But because something inside me had gone eerily still. It was the same feeling I'd had the night I skipped my own birthday dinner because my mother had forgotten to make reservations. Claire's heartbreak over a 2-month fling had taken center stage again. That night I told myself it was okay. This time there was no story to tell myself. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. I needed to see it. All of it. Line by line. The truth without the emotion. 3 years of recurring payments. Utilities, cable, internet. Some months higher in winter. A few late fees here and there when I was covering rent and their costs at the same time. The total. $15,342. I read that number aloud. Quietly. Like it might echo. That was the cost of being a ghost in my own family. That was what I had paid for 3 years of emotional silence, ignored texts, and backhanded compliments. I clicked open the auto-payment tab. Portland Utilities Board. Water. Northwest Electric. MCAS. My finger hovered. One by one I cancelled them. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. I shut the laptop, walked into my dark room, and lay on my bed with a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't obligated to keep the lights on in a house that treated me like a shameful secret. And for once, I let the darkness be still. The next morning the messages started. At 8:43 a.m. Mom. Sweetie, the internet bill's due. Can you help again just for this week? At 9:07 a.m. During a conference call with my research team. Dad, voicemail, they called the house. Said power might be cut. Your mother can't even open the oven. You want to embarrass the whole house. Call back now. I didn't answer. I didn't reply. I didn't even feel angry. I just went back to work. But that was only the beginning. Because 3 weeks later, I saw the garden party unravel, without ever leaving my apartment. And the moment Claire's doctor boyfriend turned around at the chaos and said one word, "Boss," I realized something they never did. I didn't need their approval. They needed me. And they just lost the one person who'd never asked for anything in return. 3 weeks later, on a gray-skied Saturday, I sat in my apartment, sipping cold coffee, watching the steam rise off a loaf of banana bread I just pulled from the oven. I wasn't supposed to feel anything. Not curiosity, not sadness, not satisfaction. But I did. Today was my mother's birthday. The party had been planned for weeks. The backyard was probably decked in string lights. Lavender and daisies in little white pots. I'd seen a forwarded email from Aunt Margaret with the catering list. 32 guests. Claire's boyfriend, Dr. Noah Benson, was expected to make an appearance. Very impressive man, my mom had told people. Such good breeding. So professional. No mention of me. Had been erased. Scrubbed from the family photos like a smudge on a mirror. And yet, as the hours ticked by, I knew what was coming. At exactly 4:12 p.m. my phone buzzed. Mom. Emily. Power's out. Nothing's working. Can you check on it for me? No hello. No apology. No hint that they remembered the last conversation. Just an assumption. As if I were still the switch they could flip to keep the party glowing. I stared at the message for several long seconds, then placed the phone face down on the table and looked out the window. The silence in my apartment felt like a soft blanket. There was no one yelling. No guilt in the air. Just the hum of my own peace. 2 minutes later another call came. My father. I didn't answer. Voicemail followed. The water's out. No one can shower. The stove won't turn on. The guests are here and your mother is losing it. Call back. Fix it. Don't embarrass us. Fix it. That's what I had always been. Fixer. The daughter who didn't ask questions. Who transferred money in silence. Who never once said, "I need help too." Another text came. This time from Claire. Claire. What are you doing? Mom's crying. You chose today to throw a tantrum. Just send the payment and we'll deal with it later. I didn't respond. But it wasn't silence they were really afraid of. It was absence. They weren't used to the house being cold, dark, unplugged. They had no idea how everything functioned because I had never let it fail. Till now. Soon more messages poured in. Uncle Mike. Emily, seriously? This isn't cool. Aunt Linda. Your mom is humiliated in front of everyone. You could have waited until after the party. Then came a number I didn't recognize. A message that simply read, "Unknown. Claire was right. A daughter like you doesn't belong at a happy occasion." And that was when I knew I'd done the right thing. Because the moment I stopped being useful, they stopped pretending to love me. I picked up my mug, sipped my cold coffee, and thought of every time I'd canceled dinner plans to cover their bills. Every Friday night I'd spent sorting my budget spreadsheet to fit their heating cost. Every time I cried in my car after hearing my mother praise Claire for bringing home someone worth showing off. I stood up, walked to the window and opened it. The air smelled like spring rain. Fresh, a little sharp. I inhaled deeply. My phone rang again. Aunt Margaret. Of all the people in the family, she was the only one who ever asked, "How are you?" without expecting something in return. I hesitated, then answered. Her face appeared on the screen. She was sitting in the kitchen I recognized from my childhood. White curtains, pale green walls, the same dented copper teapot still warming in the background. She looked tired. "Alma," she said gently. "Are you busy?" I shook my head. "No. Just finished baking." She looked over her shoulder. I could hear voices behind her. Tension. Frustration. My mother muttering about ruined plans. My father barking about guests being cold and angry. And Claire, of course Claire, crying about how her big day had been ruined by someone who always had a chip on her shoulder. Then Claire appeared on the screen. Her face was flushed, eyes wide, eyeliner smudged. She hovered over Aunt Margaret's shoulder like a specter of disappointment. "How much colder can you be, Alma?" she snapped. "The whole family's humiliated. And you sit there like a stone." I didn't answer right away. I stared at her. At the sister who'd always been praised, shielded, and adored. The sister who had never once asked if I was okay, even when I was collapsing under the weight of everyone else's needs. Then I said, "You really think I did this out of spite?" Claire blinked. "I didn't," I continued. "I did it because for once, I chose to live for myself." There was a long pause. And then, another voice entered the frame. "Alma." It was a man's voice. Hesitant. Confused. A tall figure stepped into view. He had sleeves rolled up, blazer off. He looked like he wasn't sure whether to speak or step back. But he looked right at me. And said, "Boss." Time froze. Everyone in the kitchen stopped. My mother looked up. My father turned toward the sound. Claire stiffened beside him. I tilted my head slightly. There he was, Dr. Noah Benson, lead scientist on the protein mapping project my company had approved last quarter. The same Noah who had signed off a funding memo with, "Thanks to Ms. Alma Harris for believing in our direction from day one." I had never met him in person, but I knew that name, that project, that mind. And now he was standing in my mother's kitchen, looking at me like someone had just revealed the sun was fake. He blinked. "I didn't know you were Claire's sister." I gave a polite, quiet nod. He turned to Claire. "You never told me you had a sister." Claire's eyes darted nervously. It's complicated. I didn't think it mattered. You two don't know each other, right?" Noah didn't answer her. He turned back to the screen. "I admire your work. I wouldn't be where I am if you hadn't pushed for our proposal." Then he looked around at the room, the mess, the silence, the avoidance, and said something no one else had dared to say in 32 years. "I'm sorry. You didn't deserve this." I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just said, "Hope the party still goes well." Behind him my mother barked, "Noah, don't be ridiculous. That girl's never done anything for anyone. She's just bitter." Noah turned sharply. "With all due respect," he said loud and clear, "Alma isn't just someone. She's the reason your lights stayed on." Then he looked directly at Claire. "If I had known this was your family, I would have asked different questions from the beginning." The screen went quiet. I ended the call. And for the first time in my life, someone else had spoken the truth I had carried alone for years. The screen went black. Just like that, it was over. Noah's voice still echoed in my ears. Not the words exactly, but the way he'd said them. Measured, but full of clarity. Like someone flipping on a light switch in a room I'd been wandering in the dark for years. I sat back in my chair, hands resting on my lap, the window to my left letting in the faint scent of jasmine from the neighbor's garden. For a moment, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't even feel vindicated. I just felt real. It wasn't that Noah had taken my side. It was that someone from outside the family, someone respected, admired, even praised by them, had recognized me for who I truly was. Not a backup character. Not a bank account. But a person. Builder. Leader. I washed my coffee mug in the sink and let the warm water run over my hands for a bit longer than usual. I was about to make tea when my phone buzzed again. New email. From Noah Benson. Subject: I owe you an explanation. I dried my hands and sat down at the table, heart beating just a little faster. I didn't know what to expect. Maybe an apology. Maybe a plea to protect his career. Instead it read, "Hey Alma. Tonight was probably strange for you and honestly for me too. I'm writing this not to win favor, but to preserve respect. I've admired you professionally for a long time. When I was notified that the board had approved funding for my project, your name was the first one I noticed. I once told a colleague that having someone like you backing us gave me the courage to take risks. I didn't know Claire was your sister. In fact, Claire never once mentioned having a sister. I'm ending the relationship, not because of pressure, but because I don't want to build something on omission and the erasure of others. Thank you for how you handled today. That kind of grace is rare. Noah. I stared at the line. Claire never once mentioned having a sister. I shouldn't have been surprised. But something about seeing it in writing felt like a dagger with a velvet handle. Smooth. Silent. She hadn't just ignored me. She'd erased me. From her life, her stories, her plans. I replied with a photo of a handwritten note. There was something more human about it. I wanted him to hear my voice in the strokes of the pen. Noah, you don't owe me anything. But thank you for saying what no one else ever had the courage to say. I don't bring family into business, and I won't start now. You have the right to walk away from what doesn't feel honest. I hope the next thing you build is strong because it's built with truth. Uma. Clicked send. A few minutes later, another ping. But this time not from Noah. Blair. What did you say to him? Noah called. He said it's over. I'm sorry if I ever did something wrong, okay? But why would you make him leave me like that? I exhaled slowly. She still didn't get it. Still thought today's unraveling had been orchestrated by me, as if I had whispered poison into Noah's ear. She thought the consequence came from a single conversation, not from the weight of years. The silence, the lies. Type carefully. Noah didn't leave you because of me. He left because of the way you treat people. The way you erase what doesn't make you look perfect. I didn't ruin your relationship. You did that all by yourself. I didn't sign it. I didn't ask if she was okay. Because for once, I wasn't going to play the role of comforter. I set the phone aside. 20 minutes passed. Maybe more. I was wiping down my balcony railings when the doorbell rang. One sharp, long press. Not like a delivery driver or neighbor. The kind of ring that says, "We need to talk." I peeked through the peephole and froze. My parents, each stood with a small suitcase. My father wore his travel baseball cap. My mother had wrapped a shawl around her head like she did when she wanted to look respectable. They didn't smile. They just waited. I opened the door slowly. They stepped in like ghosts, dragging their bags across the wooden floor. The room smelled faintly of cinnamon and fresh basil from my little herb shelf. We sat in silence for a while. My mother looked everywhere but at me. My father clasped his hands in front of him like he was preparing to deliver a lecture. Finally he spoke. We should probably talk calmly. I didn't answer. Just waited. He cleared his throat. We're sorry. For what happened on your mother's birthday. We shouldn't have said those things. My mother chimed in, her voice soft, rehearsed. Everyone was under pressure. Claire had just broken up. The internet was down. The house was dark. Guests were upset. It got out of hand. They weren't here because they missed me. They were here because things had collapsed. The house is struggling, my father added. Claire's unemployed. Your mother hasn't slept in days. We don't want to ask, but if you could help, just until things settle down. How much? I asked, cutting through their soft pleas. He blinked. 2,000. Maybe 2,500. A month. The air between us thinned. Just until Claire finds something, my mom added. She's still fragile. The breakup hit her hard. I leaned forward. So when Claire gets a job, how much will she contribute? My father squinted. What? 2,000 a month. Same as me. She's not well. I wasn't well either, I interrupted. I had a fever of 104 degrees once and still wired your payment. I sold my laptop when work cut my bonus. I went hungry for a weekend to pay your internet. They fell silent. I continued, my tone level but firm. I'll help, if you agree to sign a legal statement. That the Oak Ridge house will go to me when you pass. My father stood up, fists clenched. You're setting terms with your own parents. No, I said. I'm setting boundaries. If I'm the one funding this family, I deserve to be treated as more than a ghost. My mother cried silently, but I stayed still. And this time I didn't apologize for making them uncomfortable, because they had spent decades making me invisible. And now they were going to learn what it felt like to see me, not just as a daughter, but as a woman who finally understood her worth. The silence after I laid out the terms felt like standing at the edge of a canyon, wide, echoing, impossible to ignore. My father's eyes were burning, not with rage exactly, but something older. Something rooted in pride and shame, laced with disbelief that I was no longer bending. That I was no longer the daughter who took his silence as permission, his demands as law. You're talking about inheritance, he spat. While we're still alive. No, I said calmly. I'm talking about fairness. My mother clutched the ends of her shawl, her fingers trembling. Alma, this isn't you. You're the thoughtful one. Claire's always been the sensitive one. You've always been our rock. There it was again. The burden buried in a compliment. The praise that shackles you to silence. I was fragile too, I said, my voice lower now. But you only ever made room for one kind of brokenness, Claire's. I watched as my words hit them like rain falling on an old roof, sinking in slowly, but unable to be brushed away. I lay in a hospital alone after knee surgery. Had no one. Not one visit, not one call. And I still wired your bills. That wasn't thoughtful, Mom. That was loyal to the point of self-destruction. My father scoffed and muttered. You always kept track like an accountant. We didn't raise you to count every cent. I looked him dead in the eye. No, you raised me to count for nothing. He recoiled slightly, and for the first time in my life, I saw something crack in his posture. Maybe guilt, maybe regret, maybe just the discomfort of finally being challenged by the child who never dared. I'm not punishing you, I continued. I'm preserving myself. My voice was steady now, tired but not broken. If you want help, you'll get it. But it'll be documented. Cool. Transparent. And no more of this narrative that I'm fine, because I don't cry loud enough. My mother's lips parted like she wanted to speak, but the words never came. So I stood up, walked to the shoe rack by the door, and took out 2 pairs of guest slippers. I laid them on the floor in front of them, not as an offering but as a closing gesture. I think we should stop here for today. My father's jaw tensed, but he didn't argue. My mother wiped the corner of her eye, softly murmuring, We'll think about what you said. They rose slowly, suitcases trailing behind them like broken promises. At the door I added one last thing. I'm not shutting the door on you. But if you want to come back, come with truth. Not with tears. Not with pressure. I closed the door quietly behind them. No slamming. No anger. Just quiet. And in that stillness, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped losing. That night I didn't cry. I didn't reread their messages or replay their voices. I brewed chamomile tea, curled up on the couch with a blanket I bought on a trip to Vermont, a trip no one in my family even knew I'd taken. Because I had stopped telling them about the parts of my life they didn't ask to see. 2 years passed. No calls. No holiday greetings. Not even a forwarded chain message. My number didn't change. Neither did my address. But they made no effort. And for once, that didn't ache the way I thought it would. Just made room. My apartment was still small but full of light. The same vase of dried lavender sat on the dining table where my father once slammed his hand in anger. The spice rack in my kitchen had grown. Cumin, turmeric, fennel, everything labeled and lined up with precision. Not for anyone else. Just for me. I learned how to make Moroccan lentil soup. I joined a yoga class. I adopted a shy, orange cat I named Jasper who liked curling up in the windowsill while I worked from home. I worked less. I lived more. I met with friends who never once asked what my sister was doing or why my parents never showed up to my birthday. They only asked if I was sleeping enough, eating well, laughing sometimes, And then a few months ago, a message from Noah popped up. Not long. Just a note. Thought of you today. Our team hit a milestone. You were right to fund the slow path. It turned out to be the stronger one. Hope you're well. Smiled. I didn't need to reply. Because sometimes closure isn't a conversation. It's living well. And letting the noise stay behind you. Still, the silence from my parents remained a low hum in the background of my life. Not painful but noticeable. Like the hum of an appliance you unplugged long ago but still occasionally reach for out of habit. One day, during a rare thunderstorm in Portland, I sat by the window with a mug of tea and a journal I hadn't touched in years. I opened to a blank page and began writing. Not to them. Not even for anyone else. But for me. For the girl who had once cried into her hands because her mother forgot her 12th birthday. For the woman who funded a household in secret, praying that maybe one day, they'd finally see her as something other than a utility. And for the person I had finally become. Whole, independent, unashamed. I wrote. They said I'd embarrass them if I showed up. But when I disappeared, the lights turned off. Not just in the house. But in their illusion of who held the power. And maybe that's what this story really was about. Not revenge. But revelation. That when you stop begging to be seen, you start to see yourself. And nothing, not even silence, can take that away from you. There's a strange kind of power in choosing silence. Not the kind that makes you invisible, but the kind that protects you. 2 years of quiet gave me more clarity than 32 years of noise ever could. I never reached back out to them. I didn't send birthday wishes or holiday cards. I didn't forward the family photos Aunt Margaret occasionally sent me. I didn't go digging for closure. I simply lived. That might sound selfish to someone who's never been the invisible one. But when you've spent most of your life being the emotional janitor, cleaning up messes, swallowing pain, picking up the pieces for people who never even noticed, you learn the beauty of saying, enough. And yet, it was a Sunday morning in April when the past knocked one last time. Literally. I was repotting a basil plant on my balcony, sun glowing soft against my cheek, when I heard the knock. Low, firm, deliberate. I walked to the door, wiping soil off my hands, and looked through the peephole. Blair. Lone. No suitcase. No boyfriend. No makeup even. Just her in a worn cardigan and jeans, hair pulled back, eyes tired. Opened the door. She didn't speak. She just looked at me like someone who had lost something she never thought could disappear. Hi, she finally said, her voice hoarse. I didn't move. Didn't smile. Didn't scowl. I just waited. I didn't know where else to go. Her eyes shimmered. Not with performative tears this time, but something deeper. Real. Mom's in the hospital. Dad's staying overnight, but he's not handling things well. I crossed my arms. And you came to me. She swallowed. Because I know you'd care. Even if you won't admit it. I let her words sit between us like fog. Then I asked, does Mom know you're here? She shook her head. She wouldn't want me to come. Of course she wouldn't. Because if I stepped into that hospital room, it would mean acknowledging that the daughter she dismissed, erased, humiliated, was the one they needed now. Why now, Claire? Asked, keeping my tone level. Why after everything? Claire hesitated, then stepped closer, her voice cracking. Because when everything fell apart, I realized something. I had parents who praised me, protected me, but I never had to carry anything. You carried everything. And we never even looked back to see if you were tired. I exhaled slowly. She continued. I was wrong. About so much. About who you are. About how strong you are. And I didn't come here for money. Or to fix the family. Came because I miss my sister. The one I pretended didn't exist. That did something. Not everything. But something. I stepped aside and let her in. She looked around my apartment like it was the first time she'd ever really seen me. You did all this alone. No, I said. I did this when I stopped waiting for them. We sat at the table. Porty. She watched me quietly, her fingers curled around the mug. I read the email Noah sent me, she said after a while. He nodded. He made the right choice. He said you never once said a bad word about me. Even when you could have burned the whole house down. I don't believe in burning houses, I said. But I believe in walking out of them when the roof leaks for years and no one fixes it. Claire smiled softly. I deserved worse. I didn't answer. She continued. I'm not asking to be forgiven overnight. I just want to start with truth. That word again. Truth. The one thing that had been missing for so long in our family's vocabulary. Truth that my father used fear instead of affection. Truth that my mother only loved what sparkled. Truth that Claire had been raised to shine, while I was raised to serve. But also, truth that we had both been trapped. Me by duty, her by delusion. I don't know what comes next, I told her. I don't either, she replied. But I know it doesn't have to look like the past. He nodded. Then let's see what a future looks like without shame. We didn't hug. That would have been too easy. Instead, we sat in silence and let the air between us fill with something we'd never shared before. Mutual recognition. That night I visited the hospital. Not to play hero. Not to show up like some messiah. But to be present. Because despite everything, I'm still human. My mother was pale, resting. My father sat beside her, hand limp in hers. He looked up when he saw me. Tired. Well, sure. He didn't speak. Neither did I. But when I placed the container of soup on the bedside table and sat in the far chair, he nodded. It wasn't an apology, but it was a start. The days that followed were slow, awkward, filled with conversations that stopped and restarted like a broken tape recorder. But something was different. They didn't ask me for anything. Not money. Not solutions. Not silence. They just asked how I was. For the first time. And I told them. Bit by bit. Some parts were hard to hear. For them. For me. But we stayed. We listened. We built something not from scratch but from the rubble. And that perhaps was enough. Not redemption. But repair. Healing doesn't happen like thunder. Doesn't crash down all at once. It trickles. Quiet, slow, like the first drops of spring rain after a long, cracked winter. That's how it was with my parents. Not instant. Not perfect. But real. After my mother was discharged, I visited their house once. Just once. The place looked exactly the same on the outside. White trim, a porch with chipped railings, lavender bushes struggling to bloom. But inside something had shifted. They didn't ask me to cook. They didn't ask me to pay. They asked where I wanted to sit. My father even cleared a chair for me at the table. Something so small, but so startling it almost made me choke on my water. Claire came by a few days later, bringing groceries instead of chaos. She didn't dramatize. She didn't cry. She helped fold laundry with Mom, then made tea. At one point she looked over at me and said, I found an entry-level comms job near here. Not glamorous, but I'm starting next Monday. He nodded. That's a good step. She smiled. And I made a deal with myself. Every time I want to complain, I'll write a gratitude line first. My mother chuckled weakly from the couch. God help us if she runs out of lines. We all laughed. And for the first time in years, it didn't feel hollow. Later that night, after Claire left and Mom was resting, my father and I stood quietly in the kitchen. The kettle steamed between us. He fidgeted with the edge of the countertop. She's trying, he said. He nodded. You are too, he added after a long pause. And I see that now. I really do. I wanted to believe him. But belief takes time. Do you remember when I was 10, I said softly. And I made you a Father's Day card with circuit boards and you told me it was too nerdy to hang on the fridge? He winced. Yeah, I do. That's when I stopped showing you things I built. His shoulders sagged a little. I thought I was pushing you to be better, he said. I didn't realize I was telling you not to be seen. I let the silence hold us there. I never stopped loving you, he added. I know, I replied. But sometimes love without visibility feels like absence. He nodded slowly. I'll do better, he said. And for once I believed he meant it. We didn't become the perfect family after that. There were still long pauses, still old wounds. But the difference was, we no longer ran from them. We faced them. And facing them gave us the courage to begin anew. I returned home that evening to my apartment. Jasper greeted me with a lazy stretch. I kicked off my shoes, lit a candle, and sat by the window, letting the breeze carry in the scent of rain and soil. My phone buzzed. It was an email notification. Subject: Q3 funding approval. Strataline. Clicked it open. The board had approved our next phase. And just beneath the formalities, a short note from our CEO. Your advocacy for the neuro repair direction was dead on. We're initiating a new mentorship program next quarter. We'd like you to lead it. Smiled. Not because it was a promotion, but because it was validation I had never asked for, but had finally earned. Not by being the loudest, but by being the most consistent. And now I was being seen for what I truly was. Not a ghost in the machine, but its architect. A few days later, I sat across from Claire at a quiet cafe near the park. She was drinking chamomile tea, tapping her fingers nervously on the mug. You okay? Yes. She nodded, then laughed. It's just strange starting over. You're not starting over, I said. You're just starting true. Her eyes watered slightly. How do you forgive someone who took so much? Thought about that, then answered honestly. You don't have to forgive all at once. You just have to stop feeding the wound. We sat in silence for a bit, watching the leaves outside rustle. I wish Mom had seen us like this years ago, she whispered. Maybe she wasn't ready. Maybe we weren't either. She looked at me. You're my sister. I never said that proudly before. But I do now. I let those words settle. And for the first time in our lives, they didn't feel forced, or convenient, or borrowed. They felt like truth. When I got home that evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the old family photo album. It had always been tucked away, an artifact of a story I never felt part of. But tonight I flipped through the pages. And when I found the one from my 12th birthday, the one with Claire front and center, and me barely visible at the edge, I smiled. Not out of bitterness, but because I finally understood that the girl on the edge of the frame had never been invisible. She was just waiting for the right moment to step into the center. And now that she wasn't leaving. There's a strange freedom in not needing applause. When you've lived your life in the shadows, carrying burdens, holding peace, paying bills no one knew existed, you don't crave spotlights. You crave recognition that doesn't come with a price. Respect without conditions. Love that sees you without first asking what you've done for them lately. 2 years ago, I was nothing but a quiet line item in my family's life. Useful, invisible, disposable. Today I'm something else entirely. Not a savior. Not a victim. Just Alma. Oh. I stood on the rooftop of my building one evening as the sun painted streaks of amber across the Portland skyline. Jasper padded softly beside me, curling around my leg. I had brought up a blanket, some mint tea, and a book I'd been meaning to finish for months. Then I heard the ding of my phone. New email. It was from the hospital's community board. They were looking for an outside advisor for their digital systems revamp. Someone with both tech knowledge and a lived understanding of patient care. Aunt Margaret had dropped my name. Smiled. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I looked out at the glowing sky, thought about the countless nights I used to spend refreshing my bank app, praying a bonus would land in time to save my parents from a shutoff notice. And now, they were managing. My father picked up part-time hours at a local tool shop. My mother had started volunteering at a senior center, something she said filled the time, though I suspected it filled more than that. Claire was still working her comms job. She had moved into a shared apartment, started seeing a therapist, and no longer sent passive-aggressive texts when life got hard. We weren't best friends, but we were sisters finally. The real kind. One afternoon I received a package. No return address. Inside was a box of old family photos and a card. On the front it said, "We see you." Inside, my mother's handwriting. shaky but unmistakable. Uma. I don't expect everything to heal overnight. But I want to say thank you. For keeping the lights on. For staying even when we didn't deserve it. And for showing us what love looks like when it stops being silent. Mom. I closed the card and held it to my chest. It didn't erase the years. But it acknowledged them. And sometimes that's enough. That same week, I was asked to speak at a local Women in Tech summit. My talk was titled The Invisible Pillars. How Quiet Strength Holds the World Together. I stood on that stage in a blazer I had bought with my first bonus and told a room full of strangers what it meant to be the one everyone forgot, until everything broke without you. They cried. They stood. They thanked me. But most of all they saw me. And not because I had become something, but because I had stopped letting others define what that something had to be. At the end of the event, a young woman came up to me, her eyes wet. My mom always tells me I'm too quiet, that I don't belong in places where people shine. But hearing you speak made me feel like I matter. I took her hand and said, "You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You just have to be real." And as I walked away from the stage, I knew. I hadn't just reclaimed my voice. I had built a life where I never had to raise it again to be heard. Some stories don't end with revenge. They end with release. Because the truest form of justice isn't always seeing the ones who hurt you fall. It's standing tall in the life they said you didn't deserve. I used to think that if I kept giving, someday they'd love me louder. But love that requires sacrifice to survive is not love. It's obligation in disguise. So here's what I've learned. You are not selfish for setting boundaries. You are not cruel for walking away from disrespect. And you are not weak for finally choosing yourself. If this story resonated with you, even just a little, leave a comment and share your truth. Someone out there is still in the shadows, waiting to hear that they're not alone. And if you'd like to hear more powerful, emotional stories about finding strength through betrayal and rising above it, subscribe to Revenge Echoes. Because every journey deserves to be heard.